Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. This is the Aspen City Council work session for August 1st, 2023. On our agenda this evening are two council goal work plan check-ins, one on protecting the environment and the other is on mobility. Tessa, I think you're going to introduce this first item.
Yes, indeed. Good evening, Council. My name is Tessa Schreiner. I'm the Sustainability Manager.
Can you hear me?
We hear you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, John.
I can hear Ward. I think I can hear Bill.
Do you hear us in room, John? John? John, can you hear us?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and I'm Matt Kuhn. I'm the Parks and Open Space Director.
Great. Well, we're here this evening to present on the Protect Our Environment Council Goal Work Plan. So this goal asks us to take meaningful action and provide leadership in protecting the natural environment, reducing Aspen's greenhouse gas emissions by the amount scientifically proven to limit global temperature change, and supporting community resilience to climate change and natural disasters. This will be accomplished through 5 sub-goals. I've paraphrased a bit here, but maximizing efficiency and minimizing emissions, finalizing building performance standards and creating a funding plan for building IQ, developing a financial plan for climate action policies, investing in the redundancy and climate change resilience for utility systems, and expanding our commitment to ecological health. Before we dive into the milestones specifically to accomplish these sub-goals, I just want to acknowledge the kind of impact of these sub-goals here collectively, addressing some of our most pressing issues in the climate realm, including the built environment, aligning operations and funding with our climate work, and really taking steps to be stewards of our natural environment and what makes Aspen, Aspen. So this evening, we seek to understand if the milestones that we have created capture Council's intent for this goal, and if Council has any changes or direction for us for what we present tonight. So our first milestone is to align city operations with the Aspen Sustainability Action Plan. The first sub-goal is maximizing efficiency and minimizing emissions. And the first milestone in that is this aligning city operations. And so in brief, this is a action item where we will take working with each city department within the city to create a plan to work towards our ASAP, or our Aspen Sustainability Action Plan, objectives and goals. There's a lot of work already being done, really good work in the city that is in alignment with this, and we are just going to formalize that process to ensure that we're working collectively towards the goal. So our timeline for that is Q3 of this year to Q3 of next year. The second milestone under this sub-goal is to implement initiatives to accelerate the Aspen Sustainability Action Plan. So we came to Council in May of this year for a work session to present on 5 key initiatives to accelerate our greenhouse gas emissions reduction, including working on waste reduction, the built environment and building IQ, a fleet and facilities analysis. These are estimated to cost about $600,000 in total, which we anticipate to pull from the STR funds that are designated for environmental work. And we will host work sessions on these topics in 2024 and 2025. The next sub-goal we'll chat about is the finalizing the building performance standards and a funding plan for building IQ. So the first milestone under this is to again, finalize the BPS, the building performance standards, stakeholder process, and summarize recommendations. As Council is aware, we've been working with a large group of stakeholders since the beginning of this year to develop BPS guidelines, again, building performance standard guidelines. This is the second part of building IQ, which has 2 phases, benchmarking and BPS. This work will be done in Q2 of 2024 when that stakeholder recommendation process will sum up. And we have worked with the stakeholders, and this spring, they have asked us to gather a lot more data on local buildings and potential cost for making some of these upgrades to reach a potential building performance standard. And the committee felt they needed more information to do that. So staff responded, have pivoted this process to get that data, and we will start this process again with the stakeholders and reconvene them in the fall. We'll have a information-only memo coming to you in August on this topic. The second milestone is to bring these guidelines to council for adoption. Pretty self-explanatory, but we will summarize the recommendations from this group and then bring them to council for consideration and adoption in Q3 of 2024. We will have a work session with council prior to bringing these for adoption. The last milestone under this is sub-goal is to develop Building IQ implementation funding plan and to bring it to council for approval. So what we've heard from the stakeholder group as well as additional stakeholders is funding considerations for Building IQ is a big part of this process and a big consideration to make. So we are talking to the BPS stakeholder group about the recommendations that they would like to see and as funding is a part of the Building IQ process. We will bring options to council as part of a work session that we discussed about Building IQ and as part of a potential kind of financial plan for council approval that would essentially summarize the stakeholder recommendations and needed funding and funding options. The next sub-goal is to develop a financial plan for climate action policies and anticipated future policies. So the summary of this is to anticipate what the cost of our climate policies and our climate goals to be, including the Aspen Sustainability Action Plan goals and objectives. And so to our knowledge, this work is relatively new to really develop a comprehensive financial plan for reaching climate goals. And so we will do a lot of work in Q2 of 2024 to Q4 to look at best practices and work with consultants to scope that work. We'll then bring that financial plan to council for approval, which we will bring with multiple considerations for what that looks like. There's lots of funding out there in the federal space and state, and also a variety of different ways that and kind of financing mechanisms to achieve our goals. And so all of that will be in this report and will be brought to council anticipated Q2 of 2025. The fourth sub-goal is to address redundancy and climate change resilience in our utility systems to ensure reliable service delivery. So resilience in utility systems in summary. So staff would like to start with a conducting of an inventory and a gap analysis for relevant internal and regional plans. So essentially, we have a lot of plans within the city of Aspen, and we anticipate regionally that talk about the topics of resilience, vulnerability, electrification, not only at the county level, but also with other regional partners. We want to ensure and just analyze what is in existence already, what may be missing, and then what case studies we can bring forth to start to really move the needle on resilience of our utility systems. We anticipate this work to be done by Q4 of 2024 in a work session in Q3 and Q4 to present to council our findings and any recommendations for either resource needs or steps forward. The next step in this is to conduct key projects within the already adopted Integrated Water Resource Plan, or IRP, and the Water Efficiency Plan. These plans go into detail and identify a lot of key objectives to really move the needle in our utility systems, resilience and conservation and stewardship. There's a few projects within those plans that could really make a difference and have a high impact. And so staff has already identified those and just needs to determine priority and resource needs, which we will bring back to council anticipated during the budget cycle of 2024. And then those projects would be in development until 2025.
Ready for a break?
Ready.
Okay. So I'm going to speak on these next couple slides, which are relating to the section E, which is expanding our commitment to wildlife conservation, wildfire mitigation, open space stewardship, river health, and preservation of the urban forest. We're really excited to be included in this. This is the stuff we do. This is what we love doing in our department, and that key word there, the starting word of expanding, is what I want to talk about in these next couple slides. So, kicking it off here with wildlife, our police department has done a tremendous job over the last couple decades coordinating a interdepartmental or multi-departmental program from everything from safety-related issues to the coordination with businesses and kind of the various stakeholders. We're looking at shifting that over to the Parks and Open Space Department. Our rangers have been actively working over the last couple of years monitoring bear compliance in the core, and with increasing complexity in the core as well as throughout town, shifting that program over to us in the Parks Department and coordinating this both internal and external effort. On our urban forest, over the last couple decades, we've undertaken a inventory of the urban forest every 5 to 7 years. We also manage our urban forest of about 12,000 trees in a zone aspect, and we're proposing to set a milestone here to actually shift and do an annual inventory that will inform what we're doing the subsequent year and how we're best managing this resource of our urban forest. I think we all know this is one of the best resources we have available to us to mitigate temperatures in our urban environment, as well as curb greenhouse gases and other effects. So by shifting our approach here and trying to be a little more proactive on our inventory and management, we'll be looking to address the urban forest management. On the open space side, we have a number of properties that currently do not have management plans. Over the next 5 years, we'd like to kind of double down and spend a lot more time writing those management plans, ensuring that we're taking the best possible actions for both the resource as well as our community's use of those spaces. We're currently in the midst of a process to adopt a new management plan for Ute Cemetery. It's been on hold. We're at a bit of a staff capacity issue with complexities around other projects. And so we are proposing that a natural resource manager be added to our department in 2024 to bolster our ability to affect both this and the next program, which is wildfire. Our department has been pretty involved with wildfire mitigation as well as regional coordination over the last 5 years or so. The image here shows a fairly small mitigation project that was done near the Merle housing 2.5 years ago. We've also done other mitigation projects around town up near the Ute Cemetery, and it's something we'd like to lean into and do more of. And again, this is a capacity issue. It takes quite a lot of time to coordinate this, ensure that we've got community outreach and buy-in, and that we're hitting the right areas. So over the next 12 months, we'd like to undertake more mitigation projects. We'd also like to expand our participation in the Roaring Fork Wildfire Collaborative. We're currently attending those meetings and participating, but I think there's opportunities for be more of a player in that. And finally, I wanted to mention that the city's contributions and participation in wildfire include working with the Aspen Fire Department for supporting the CoA, which is a artificial intelligence detection for early wildfire identification, that's the word.
Detection. Great. And the fifth and final milestone under this sub-goal is an inventory and compilation of existing plans related to stewardship. The focus here would be internal compilation, and I know this may sound, boring for the lack of a better word, and it is so important to understand what plans we already have in place, both internally, where our departments can collaborate more on expanding our commitment to ecological health, and all the things that Matt mentioned. And in addition to that, where our gaps are, and then where other groups in the community, nonprofits, et cetera, other organizations are doing really good work, where we can leverage dollars and leverage partnerships to increase our impact in this space. And we will bring those recommendations back to council for everything from where we need to kind of bolster or enhance certain plans to where we feel we need increased budget allocation, to also where we could financially support outside organizations to do good work that they are already doing in this field and in this space. So in summary, we would love to hear from council if this is the right direction that we're headed in on this goal, if the milestones capture this intent, and if council has any questions, changes, or direction for us.
Thank you. Looking online, you guys can raise a digital hand if you like, or raise a physical hand, because I can see each one of you. So start with you guys. Ward, John, Bill, questions, comments, suggestions?
Yeah, one of my, I think we need to prioritize some of these within some of these departments, and it seems to me that wildfire mitigation and coordination should be a high priority. And I'm curious how we can coordinate and join forces with Pickens County, U.S. Forest Service, and others to address wildfire dangers, mitigation, and perhaps evacuation. I don't think the evacuation falls under the subject for this evening, but wildfires are certainly, I think, should be a high priority.
So I can quickly answer that. We are members and we've signed on to this multi-jurisdictional team that includes the U.S. Forest Service, Pickens County, and municipalities up and down the valley, looking at the big picture about wildfire mitigation. And they're just hitting their stride, and we're an active partner in that. And so I do think over the years, not just in wildfire mitigation, but also in kind of broader forest health, the city has been a participant in these regional efforts. And I wanted to highlight more recently, the city led an effort over the last 3 years on Doug fir beetle mitigation on Shadow Mountain and over on the Ute side of Aspen Mountain. And that's something that we want to lean into, we want to continue doing, and expanding our efforts on really does require increased staff capacity, because we're at our limits on what we can do, and if we want to take on more and more active roles, we just need a little bit more time on our plate.
Thank you.
I also had on resiliency under those categories about microgrids, and there's talk, I think it was in this section, talk about battery storage or energy storage, and if on the long range, if we're looking for microgrids, and if there's any possibility for pumped hydro storage for backup energy usage, and if there's any way we can use the city-owned turbine in a pumped hydro storage scenario.
Thank you, Ward. Yes, these are all topics that our team and utilities have been actively talking about, especially in the discussion of electrification and resilience. So we'll keep those in mind for sure.
And the council will hear much more about this next week when you're reviewing utility rate considerations for 2024, and as well as a conversation about aging infrastructure and balancing new investment versus maintaining what you have.
Thanks, Ward. Any other items?
Composition of the building proficiency group. Somewhere in my notes here I have that. Do we have private sector members of that group? Has there been any meeting? Have there been any meetings? Any communication? Who's on this group? Are you defining goals? Just give me a little bit more in-depth background on the building performance standards group.
Absolutely. And you'll receive a info-only memo with a lot of this detailed information, I believe on the August 8th or August 9th meeting. And so look out for that for whatever I'm not able to cover today. Yes, to answer your question, the group contains experts across climate fields, public and private property owners, and representatives, property management representatives. We have a good representation of our community, and we'll have the full list of that stakeholder committee as part of that info-only memo for you to view. Topics that have been discussed so far are just not only what a building performance standard is and what the scope could be, but considerations of what buildings should be included, what metric should we look at for the standard, how should electrification be discussed in this conversation. And so we've had about 4 meetings and are on pause this summer so we can gather more data, and then we'll pick back up in October, November to present that data to the stakeholder group.
Okay, should I just keep going with my list here, Tori, so you can be done listening to me all at once?
Thanks, Ward. I mean, sure, go right ahead.
On benchmarking, building IQ, we started this with city buildings a few years ago, and I'm wondering, wasn't that part to doing energy assessments of city buildings a few years ago, or and beyond what's included in the new energy efficiency building codes, what are we looking at for building performance standards?
So I think I can answer your question, but let me know if I haven't hit it. So we have certainly for the last 2 years been benchmarking all of City of Aspen owned buildings. And so now we have, as of June of this year, 2 years of benchmarking data. We have done some assessments historically on city buildings, but not all of them and not comprehensively. And so the part of this that the city audits or building audits would be a much more in-depth look at our building stock, how our buildings are performing, what opportunities there are for efficiency, et cetera. And so it'd be a lot more in-depth look. The benchmarking data that we got from these 2 years are going to be really important pieces of data as we go into those assessments, because we'll understand where we are now, what the data is telling us, and then where we need to go to reach high efficiency buildings.
And this is kind of a question for Bill. I know that previously you had said it would be irresponsible to spend STR revenues on environmental efforts. Is that still your position, Bill?
I'm not sure the context of that conversation, Ward, so I'm not going to speak on that. Thanks.
Are you in favor of spending STR revenue for the environmental benchmarks and environmental programs that staff has recommended?
Thanks for your question. I don't want to speak on that right now.
Ward, any other items that you'd like to discuss?
I'm going through the thing here. Oh yeah, on the urban forest, I think we're doing a great job on that. And I don't know how much additional resources we need on it, but I would like to see with the inventory of the urban forests, aim at balancing carbon sequestration and water usage for, I think, the different types of trees, how much water they use and how much carbon they sequester. If they're, I thought I recalled reading that the narrow leaf cottonwood did a really good job of sequestering carbon, but as I recall, cottonwoods use a lot of water. So looking at a kind of a holistic plan to incorporate water usage and carbon sequestration.
Does that make sense to you? I mean, is that attainable information? Is that the kind of discussion that's going on around urban forests and tree planting?
It's a really interesting thought. I'm going to have to connect with our forester, but I think it's a great consideration for future planting, especially in our core, where water is a difficult solution in those planting spaces.
You know, I'm a big fan of our urban forest and all that you've done, Matt, and highly supportive of it. And I think that's the end of my notes here
Thanks, Ward.
Thanks, Ward.
on this section.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
Gotcha.
Okay, I echo a lot of what Ward said. I'm really excited about the building performance standards and the benchmarking data. I think we're gonna learn a lot from that we can apply to private homes. Wildfire mitigation. I had the pleasure of going on a flight with Bruce Gordon this morning, eco flight up the Crystal River drainage. And I can tell you our dead trees on Shadow Mountain and up on Ute Trail area, it's not just there, although I think that concerns me more because it's so close to a populated area, but it's not isolated Aspen Mountain by any means. It's throughout our White River National Forest. I'm also really excited that I saw today in the paper the notice about the possible looking at enhancing our hydropower and talk about looking into energy storage. It excites me a lot, just again, to focus on resilience for our community, to avoid the possibility of losing our power like we did very narrowly in the Lake Christine fire, which, by the way, I also got a really good look at the Lake Christine burn scar today from Bruce Gordon's airplane. Yeah, that flight just underscored for me the challenges that we face as our planet's heating up. So really good job on this, Tessa and Matt. I'm really looking forward to learning more about how we're going to take this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Bill?
Thanks, Tori. Thanks, Tessa and Matt, for the presentation. Tessa, could you talk a little bit about building IQ for me and the ultimate goal? I understand the energy reduction across existing city buildings. I get that piece, right? We're taking our portfolio, we're seeing what's used, how we can implement intelligent changes to reduce our energy consumption. That makes sense to me. I don't understand the ultimate goal on private buildings. Could you speak to that for me, please?
Absolutely. So building IQ is the two parts. So benchmarking is gathering and tracking and reporting energy usage. This gives us information not just on city buildings, but on where our community is. And what we have learned really primarily and preliminarily from the first 2 years of benchmarking is that the emissions in our community not only come from, the majority come from buildings, 57% of our emissions come from the built environment, but that a lot of our emissions come from mostly gas in our buildings, right? And so our grid is 100% renewable. The emissions are mostly coming from on-site gas. So efficiency and electrification are two really big considerations across our community for reaching our climate goals in the built environment. Those are the two biggest strategies that we can implement. If we do not address efficiency and electrification in our built environment by 2050, we will not reach our climate goals. And so to your question directly about why I focus on city buildings versus also focusing on private buildings, if we only focus on city buildings, we will not have a chance of reaching our climate goals in the built environment sector. We have to make considerations for all properties, including private properties. And we are the 9th community to consider a building performance standard. Both the state of Denver the state of Colorado and the city of Denver have passed them within Colorado. Federal government is looking at it on federal buildings. There's a list of other cities as well who are considering this. And so we are at the leading edge of what this policy is, who we need to support in this process, what the scope is, and where we need to go. But federally and statewide, it is understood or I guess nationwide, it's understood that a building performance standard is a necessity to reaching climate goals, and by nature has to include all buildings to some varying degrees.
Okay, thanks. That addresses part of my question, but not all of it. Maybe I'll rephrase the piece that I'm missing. What do we do with this information, this benchmarking that we get on private buildings? What is the desired outcome? Is this used to create new policy? Is it used to try to effectuate change on existing buildings? That's where I'm unclear.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, I think to answer your question, yes, to inform policy. So if, 10 years down the line, we have 10 years of benchmarking data and we're not any closer for whatever reason to hitting our climate goals, well, we need to make adjustments. So I think, yes, inform policy. And then, yes, eventually the benchmarking data, although currently benchmarking data for private properties is not released publicly. Individual reports are released to individual building owners, but that's not public information per council direction. But that information eventually will be used to say, to implement policy and also eventually to make changes to buildings, encourage, incentivize, support, and in some cases require, but again, all of this determined by the Building Performance Standard Stakeholder Group to create guidelines for what that looks like and what standards buildings will have to reach in our community. And the stakeholder group will determine what those boundaries are.
Thanks. So I'm given pause by something you just said. You said in some cases require changes to existing buildings. Could you give me an example of how that might happen?
Yeah, so to answer that question, and if I misspoke, I apologize. It is the nature of a building performance standard is a goal that different building types have to reach. And so that goal is set with a building performance standard, and then the building owner gets to determine how that goal is met. So for example, for some buildings, if a standard is set and they just say, oh, we have an opportunity to upgrade our lighting, we haven't upgraded our lighting, for example, or change over our heating to a heat pump, they can determine how that upgrade is, or what steps are taken to reach that goal, and then have to reach the goal by a certain date. So that is the kind of framework of a building performance standard policy. It is how the state has written theirs. It's how Denver has written theirs. Again, in our Building IQ ordinance that council passed in April of 2022, it sets the guidelines for how the building performance standards will be determined and created, which is by the stakeholder group, which is now what we're in the process of doing.
So I'm sorry if I'm having trouble grasping this, but let's say I own a commercial building in Aspen and 10 years from now, you have a bunch of benchmark data on my building. What says I need to participate? And I'm to be clear, I'm not opposed to this. I'm just trying to understand it. I'm not necessarily opposed to it. Why do I have to participate in this program? In what case would I be required to participate in this program? And how is the city going to effectuate change on an existing building?
Let me try to take a stab at it. Bill, this is Tori. We're hoping that there's benefit for both community and for the private property owner. So the benchmarking process is hopefully going to elucidate some of the opportunities that you have for saving money as a building owner, but also conserving energy, conserving resources so that the rest of the community can have those benefits as well. Classic supply and demand. As we go forward, Tessa was just saying that the stakeholder group is now convened in order to come up with some of those standards and some of those targets and goals and metrics. So it has yet to unfold as to what level or intensity this program may reach. But the ultimate goals are really just to be a benefit to both the private property owner, its tenants, as well as the entire community.
I appreciate the color there, Tori. What's making me super uncomfortable is this concept of trying to require an existing building owner to do something.
But we haven't gotten there. But we haven't gotten there.
I know, but that was a specific word that Tessa used, which makes me quite uncomfortable. Now,
You know-
I love the idea of, can we, I think it's extraordinarily expensive and will be difficult to implement, but I love the idea of, hey, we'll contribute 50% of the cost to upgrading your boiler plant to an electric boiler plant, or that's just a random example. I don't have an issue with that, where there's an incentive that the city's putting its money where its mouth is. Totally okay with that, but I'm super uncomfortable with this concept of requiring an existing building to participate in something after permitting, after everything. Are very, very uncomfortable.
Yep, well, that's great, and that's the reason that you're elected and you're a member of 5 on this city council to direct these policy decisions. You will have your opportunity to direct this. Your input
Bill?
your input's great, and your input's super welcome, and this is exactly what we're doing here at the table.
Bill, I might assuage some of your concerns by policies are generally going forward and not, I sense that you're saying, well, I own a building and 10 years from now, you're going to tell me I have to do this. I think policies generally are going forward. You'll have to do this. You may not be able to have the option of having heated, propane heated fixtures or this or that, but I think they're going forward, and those existing buildings are generally grandfathered in, so that the policies I've seen don't come in and say, well, you have to remove this and put this in instead, if that addresses some of your concerns.
Thanks, Ward. It does not, because that's not what Tessa said.
It's all right. That's great, Bill. Your comments are very welcome. Your questions are welcome. If you need more information on this specifically about how the future is going to play out, we'll get you some more information. But again, you are at this table to guide this policy as we move forward. So I look forward to the conversation continuing.
All right, thanks. Tessa and Matt, it seems like, I guess these are sort of 2 comments in one, that they relate to one another, but it seems like the scope of this goal may have expanded in a significant way beyond what was discussed in our goal retreat, where I think what many of the council members were discussing was that environmental work was a lens through which to look at other policies. And I think there's some great things in here, but I just want to make sure I understand how much we are expanding the work that we're already doing in the city. So do we have a total FTE estimate on what these initiatives will take, like an increased FTE estimate on what all these initiatives that you've presented tonight will take?
So this is Sarah. A couple of things. First, there is a mention of 2 FTEs that I'll evaluate in the recommended budget to council. We'll see if they get it to the council table or not. They haven't gone through that process yet. However, for example, I hear continued requests for increased police presence in certain neighborhoods. I can't have the police managing the entire wildlife program and doing that increased enforcement requests at the same time. There's not capacity in that department, and why we've said, let's move this coordination of some of these efforts more closely under the Parks Fund and out of your general fund. And so there's not anything I heard in here that's actually new to me. Maybe there's a more concerted effort because there's a timeline demand. Additionally, every staff report you receive has a section about environmental impact on it, so that lens is in every policy issue that we're bringing forward before the council already. And certainly the council is welcome to debate those comments anytime. Staff's more than welcome to offer color to them, but we try to be pretty factual about that in the staff report.
Thanks. So if I'm hearing correctly, Sarah, it's 2 total FTEs, including the absorbing the wildlife, the trash police role.
So the wildlife coordinator role is necessary if you want to increase your capacity in the police department to focus on other community safety priorities of the council. And then the other
Understood.
one is the natural resource manager. This Roaring Fork Wildfire Collaborative is set up to do some amazing work for our valley. We have over 100 people in the collaborative that are working on concerted efforts to reduce wildfire risk. Because quite frankly, it's extremely high right now with the amount of dead wood. There's just fuel management activities that need to be scheduled and coordinated so that they have their greatest impact up and down the valley. So these are two requests that have been in the making for some time. We've been working on it for a few years. The council approved an intergovernmental agreement to participate in that regional coordination work. And we're just finding that for us to be full participants, you're not able to do that with your current staffing levels. The other thing I would just say is on building IQ, this was a directed council goal 3 years ago. And with the intention is that there would be mandates that come out of it. The conversation of carrots and sticks was a very serious one that previous councils have had and felt like they had done a lot with carrots. But that if we were going to meet the greenhouse gas reduction goals set in partnership with the community, it requires some directive work around emissions from buildings.
Okay, I think that's all my questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Sam, I'll go to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both for this great presentation, all the work that you do. Obviously, love a lot of the stuff that you said in the open space management, the urban forest. Urban forest, when I'm up at Smuggler and I look down on town or any vantage point and see more trees than not, it's definitely something to be proud of. And after going to the Aspen Historical Society and seeing this town was treeless at one point, it's really remarkable to live and breathe here now. So with that, just a few questions. One, just because of who I am, I was wondering with the water conservation effort, if you could also potentially try to identify a carrying capacity in town using like water utilities. I think that'd just be wonderful information to know, and I hope that wouldn't be too much work, but I think it would be.
That is a ton of work.
Yeah,
You just asked is a ton of work.
It's not like a math equation of understanding how much water we have.
No, there's so many more factors because the amount of water we have at any given month of the year varies. And it depends on the volume of tourism in town. So I just want to caution you that we would need 3 counselors to direct that, and we would probably need some outside expertise funding. And I can't quite figure out what the scope would be. We've tried to do this at least twice while I've been employed here, and the council has not been satisfied from our preliminary work. And there's some philosophical differences we've seen between electeds about carrying capacity, whether that's really the right measurement for growth management, and what factors should be considered for that.
Well, I felt like the easiest one would be utilities. We sort of talked about this with the Board of County Commissioners and their growth management board, and I don't know what you can bring back, and I don't know what I can specifically maybe ask, but something alluding towards carrying capacity would be wonderful, even if it's an educated guess.
Well, we'll pull, I think the last memo was written by Jessica Garrow. It's my recollection. I'm looking at Philip to see if, yeah. Okay, he did not write it. It was by Jessica. So because of the 2 hours without 2 other counselors, we will just pull the old staff report and reissue it to you.
No, that's fair. I'm just talking as far as potential direction, I don't know, as simple as it can be. I'm not trying to make it the most complex question. I just feel like there is something with water that you can do an equation for.
I wish it was that simple because we would have had this resolved. The thing I would say is that, for example, is if that's the case, then some communities take much more extreme steps to limit the issuance of building permits based upon no new taps and things like that. So establishing it means having the second conversation about what are you going to do if you choose a capacity limit, and how does that comply with recent state statutes. changes.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
To me, I just want to explain that it'd be like a guiding document to understand, like, growth in this community and what we can actually handle, especially from a natural resource perspective. And it's very important to me from an environmental standpoint because population growth is directly correlated to greenhouse gas emission growth, or at least as it has been while we still use greenhouse gas producing energy systems and cars and whatnot. So I think it's within the scope, and whatever you can do on that front, that'd be wonderful.
Is there somebody or an organization that maybe Sam could contact that looks at our regional watershed or something in that? I mean, I think Sam's really talking big picture. I would say though that Sam, whatever information you could get, I don't know how you'd necessarily apply it. And what I mean by that is regardless of year-to-year changes, month-to-month changes in water, water itself as a limiting capacity item, I don't think those are directly correlated. For example, let's say you look into this a little bit further and what you find out is that water, where we are at the headwaters, we don't have a limiting capacity for water, for service of water in our town. I mean, would that then, the answer then be that unlimited growth would be okay because our water could sustain it and stuff?
No, that's just one.
I understand.
And just real quick, one prime example is like, and this is a big city, but like, look at Phoenix, Arizona. The fact that they're still building rapidly and they have no water. I don't think we're Phoenix, but I think that's like an example in my head as far as just that's one very obvious limiting factor. If you don't have water, why would you continue to grow?
Yeah, I'm with you. Maybe there's a way for you to get
But
some.
it's just one
some
piece.
ballpark.
Water is one thing, quality of life and traffic, transportation, all the other things. It's just trying to be within the scope of this conversation, just one
Okay.
thought-provoking item.
So they'll get you the study that was done, and we'll look for other avenues for
I
information.
want to be clear, it was not a study. We were not directed to, we provided the pros and cons of defining a carrying capacity for the
Okay.
community. But you asked about who is the regional group for this, and I would point you probably to the Colorado River District. I'm looking to see, is Pete still in the room? Stricker.
Thank you.
Is that what you would say, Pete Rice? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the Colorado River District is a pretty amazing resource. We rely on them regularly.
No, once again, I just want you to know my priority is the environment and quality of life in this community. So that's where my head's at when I ask these questions. And then beyond that, sort of to like Bill's point, I just would ask potentially in future situations when talking about building IQ and building performance standards about potential examples of implementation using that for current buildings and then future policy use. Obviously, this is a study to get to that point, but it's one of those things when I read the packet and we talk about these things, it's sort of like a vague concept of step one. Or sorry, step one is like clear to get this information. Step two is super vague, and I feel like it doesn't make me like uncomfortable in the sense that like I understand where it might go, but it just doesn't feel as concrete as some of the policies we talk about up here to like be like, if we do this and it says this, then we'll do that. It's very just like super open-ended, and I just want to say that about building IQ and building performance standards, but I think it's valuable information. And then, the last thing was within the scope of this work session, the milestones and goals. I always think it's very important to try to build a potential template for other communities, because I always think it's wonderful what we're doing, but if the stuff we're doing and the milestones and all this stuff doesn't translate over to other communities, it's not the end of the world, but if it can translate over, all I'm saying is that'd be a really wonderful thing, because we're just a community of 7,000 while it's the whole world this issue is about. So thank you for doing what you can for this community, but hopefully we can be a ripple effect to better everyone involved.
Thanks for that. I think we've been successful in that area. We've definitely been a leader that other people look to, for sure. Hey, Ward, you have a hand up. I'm just wondering if that's a new hand. I guess not.
Sorry, that was an old hand.
Okay, no problem. I have a couple of just quick questions, more or less. I wanted to know if there are other climate action plans out there. Who do we look to? And if council members or member of the public wanted to look at what other communities are doing similar in nature to this, who would you direct people to see?
Yeah, for sure. I think in Colorado, Fort Collins and Boulder County, Boulder, are great examples of communities doing progressive climate work and holistic climate work. Those would be two, I think, really relevant plans that I would provide. I would have to think a little bit more on others.
And do they seem to be moving in the same process, if you will, as us? Again, when you're a leader in environmental initiatives and when you're pushing,
Yeah,
because this is the only one I know.
for sure.
And how we staff up for it, how we fund it, and how we push hard for environmental initiatives and progress is the only example I know is where I live.
Absolutely. We are, I think, in a group of forward-thinking communities, really thinking ahead of legitimately how are we going to reach our climate goals, and this is going to take some hard decisions and trade-offs, and if it were easy, we would have already done it. And so those communities are not only looking at things like building performance standards, actively developing them, but also looking at financial planning. And Denver, for example, has already implemented a tax to fund their climate office as one mechanism for funding, but lots of other communities are considering a wide variety of other options. That's just one in the toolbox. So I think financial planning for climate policy, equity-focused climate work is also something that we're seeing as not just kind of leading edge thing, but like a very central tenet in climate work. And so insofar as for IRA funding, if it's not equity-focused proposals, you cannot get funding for much of the work. And so I would say financial planning, thoughtful, really intentional financial planning, building performance standards, and equity work are at the forefront of what we're doing and also what we're seeing in other communities and other leading edge communities.
Thank you for that. I had a question for you about, and once again, I'll just state, Fort Collins and Boulder, is that the city or county or both?
Both,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, thank you. And then I had a question, this might be specific. There was an item in here under resource needs, under the options to accelerate the ASAP. There's one in here that's the energy audit of all city-owned buildings, and it's got a large range, 60 to 400,000. And I'm just wondering, and this isn't necessarily a specific answer for right now, but are there things that we should do prior to assessment, right? So if we're looking at a total price tag of $400,000, is there somewhere that we know already, hey, for example, the Armory, had we stayed in the Armory, boy, it needed work. And I don't need an assessment to let me know that. So similar to that, as I would say, before we do a thorough energy audit of all city-owned buildings, are there items that we should just take care of, whether that's leaky windows and drafts and this, that, and the other, lighting, all that? And I just put that on the table. I don't need a specific answer from you now, but I would wonder if there are things that actually maybe you'd want to come to council for funding requests to say, hey, we see these things that could be going on. I don't know. My last question that I have here is, what are we missing? When I think about the environmental work that we do, I often put it in a couple of buckets. I see it as that waste management and resource management. And I put energy and water into that. I see mobility and transit as an area of high pollution in our community. Obviously, the building and energy consumption through buildings. So I just kind of compartmentalize it and in that way. I think that maybe we have these covered in some of these goal statements, but would you suggest anything that are we missing something in the way that we talk about it? Again, city council members are hopefully looking at this from a high level and policy decisions, but a lot of this is really specific nitty gritty. And I just want to make sure that we are keeping our eye on the big policy stuff while you guys can figure out some of the down in it. Of course, we have our desires, likes, and dislikes for initiatives. Obviously, composting is something that or getting organics out of the landfill is something I've been passionate about, but are we missing anything?
Yeah, thank you for the question. For me, and then I'd love to get Matt's 2 cents as well, the first goal of the ASAP alignment is really, that is our guiding document. That is, we have taken not just best practices, but everything else that we feel we really need to do to move the needle on our goals, including waste and transportation. I mean, there's so many additional things. Yes, these are the things that we want to move the needle and focus on this year, and there's so many other things, especially related to the ASAP, that we are driving forward and working on. And so I do feel that all of those sectors are covered, even if they're not maybe as detailed as they are here.
Thank you. I got a couple of hands up. I'm going to go to John first and then Ward. John?
Yeah,
You muted yourself, John.
I just wanted to thank staff for making it easy for us to see where we need to focus our work. The 50% of greenhouse gas emissions that we aren't addressing are coming from the built environment, as Tessa said earlier. That's a very large portion of our greenhouse gases, and that makes it easy to say, this is where we need to focus our work. I think everybody at council table knows that the greenest building is the one that's already built. So if we can retrofit buildings that are already built, we keep all that stuff out of the landfill. We keep all the trucks from tearing a place down and rebuilding it. It really is a win-win situation. And again, I just want to thank staff for making it easy for us to see where we need to focus. Illustrated by Tori's point about compost in the landfill. That's another area where we weren't addressing it, and now we are. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Over to Ward.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this stuff really, to me, requires that we be attentive to our legislative action and priorities, that we should be seeking state and federal funds for perhaps building retrofits if there are grants available. Those are things that we should be going after. So it can't be just defined in a couple of departments. I think we need to go to the state and the federal level to look for funds to get this stuff done. As far as I think CoA is a good resource for some of the low-hanging fruit if people are still using incandescent bulbs, or to get LED light bulbs, to get smart thermostats, turn down the heat at night and turn off the lights when you're not using them. So those are some of the things that can be done if they're not, and there's simple behavioral changes. And then finally, a comment, I think John brought it up as well, or that we do a retreat, we come up with goals, and then staff goes and works on them, and they come back with suggestions on paths forward to achieve those goals. We at the city council set the policy. We accept or reject what they've suggested, but I don't think that Tess or anybody else has done anything that is beyond what we have asked staff to do. That staff has done a great job, I think, on giving us some choices, but we don't have to do everything that they asked for, or we can go beyond or nix some of them. But It's ultimately the two of you sitting at that table and the three of us sitting around the country that collectively set the policies that help us achieve our goals. Thank you.
Thanks, Ward. What I'm hearing from this is that the milestones capture the intent for the goal. There are no changes, necessary changes, but maybe, and no real direction for staff outside of a couple of requests.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Council.
The only color I would add, Tori, I
Yep.
don't know if I have other support on this, is that I'm very uncomfortable with the direction that this building IQ program could potentially go in. And I'm not saying that that's what we've gone in. But I'm very uncomfortable with that. I don't think that the ROI on the dollars that it would take to make major impact on existing buildings is there. And I'm certainly not comfortable with the idea of requiring or mandating that existing buildings do anything. I'm totally comfortable with incentivizing it, totally comfortable with partnering on it, not comfortable with requiring. So supportive of everything in these milestones, except for that potential direction.
Thanks, Bill. You know, that was a conversation that was at the table when we were talking about this going back 3 years even. Former council was very aware of exactly what you're talking about. We also understand the difficulty in implementation here, but we're not at that stage yet to make those decisions. So I totally agree with what you said. I appreciate with what you're saying and putting it on the table. And we will have the opportunity to be structuring this and shaping it as we go forward. So I think your input will be brought back in over the next couple of years as we try to develop a program that works for our community. Thank you guys so much. Our next item is mobility.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. Jen Uten, Senior Project Manager with the City Manager's Office. With me this evening is Scott Miller, the Public Works Director, and Pete Rice, the Director of Transportation and Parking. Tonight, we seek to understand whether or not we have correctly identified and captured milestones related to your goal of mobility. Mobility has long been a priority for the city of Aspen. We have a mature fixed route transit system, a robust transportation demand system in place, and on-demand services as well. City Council identified mobility as one of the 6 council goals through the adoption of Ordinance 90 earlier this summer, with an eye for continuing to expand and improve our already successful program. Transportation is one of the largest expenses for most households, second in most cases only to housing. And I wanted to acknowledge that an integrated transportation system is incredibly important to our community and the economy. Support of transit systems and exploration of transit fleet electrification aligns with the effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protecting the environment, which you just had some conversations about. This overview of the work plan is intended to provide a high-level look at our plans to advance the objectives identified within the mobility goal. There are 6 objectives that are adopted or sub-goals, and Pete Rice is going to kick us off here in a second to go through those. Specifically, we're looking for feedback related to whether we've interpreted those milestones correctly, and I wanted to quickly note that as we look to advance mobility over the next 2 years for this council goal cycle, we will continue to work closely with our partners, RAFTA, CDOT, and the EOTC. And with that, I'll kick it over to Pete Rice.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Mayor Tory and Council, for the opportunity to talk about this transportation goal. Objective number one is to reduce the vehicle miles traveled, and by doing that, you're increasing and improving the choice ridership and essentially reducing the reliancy on a single occupied vehicle. And so in order to do this, we're going to present a study that looks specifically at items like downtowner, how to improve any of those pieces, the local bus route, car2go, and all the services that are very good, and really use a robust outreach program to really dial in on where the improvements are in this program. This will be going to council on August 22nd, and it's the first part of it. And it's important to understand that there's a lot of players involved in this that staff will be working with, including EOTC, the Institute, and the county, and other players that also have a big stake in this mobility. The second objective is a comprehensive traffic study. Staff is planning to go to council in Q1 and really have a work session to dial it in what council's looking for in this traffic study. For example, is council really trying to alleviate the outbound congestion and prioritize a little bit of the single occupied vehicle in order to alleviate that congestion? Is it looking at more of the signals, the AM congestion? So staff will come back to council at that time and really have some alternatives and options that do meet your goals. At that time, we would go for a spring supplemental to implement your goal as you see it after that work session in the summer. The next objective is the no fare opportunity. And this one, I'm excited that RAFTA is very open to this conversation and working through this with City Council. It's important to know that they would lead this project, and there's a variety of ways that staff will work with RAFTA along with Council. It's important to remember that the RAFTA in the local bus system acts as a vendor, and so it acts like a downtowner. And so, as you can see, we've implemented as a city the no fare zones within city services because of that. Now, when you're talking about the regional bus system, we are a partner in that. And there's a variety of ways that we do this partnership. One of them is we do have a seat at the board, and that discussion can happen at a board level. Staff will also be involved with this conversation and help lead it as it goes through. Continuing on the RAFTA discussion, this is a bit out of order, but we thought this fit right into this category. Right now, RAFTA is taking under a housing assessment study that really evaluates the housing stock and creating a sustainable workforce utilizing that housing program and where some of the opportunities might be. Again, this is similar. We're a partnership with RAFTA, and we'll collaborate with RAFTA through this process and make sure as staff sees opportunities that we will be including council and maybe, joining in with RAFTA with some of those holes that they find in this study. This is Jen. You're back to Jen.
Either way, council gave us direction in May to take a different approach related to the consultant services for the Castle Creek Bridge project. And so we anticipate bringing you a contract also at the meeting on the 22nd of August, which will be consultant services to evaluate the existing bridge and its replacement in its current location, and then also to provide some context around what a pre-EIS process might look like. So the National Environmental Policy Act has some steps, so that consultant work will provide us a summary of what that looks like moving forward. So this will be accomplished with existing allocation, and we will be able to understand better the timeline, but it's a 10-month project timeline. Once we get under contract, we'll be able to have a little bit more detail about when consultants will come to council, and we also anticipate presentation to the EOTC as well as part of that contract.
back to me. The overhead, really looks at the electrification of the transit fleet. I'm really excited to report that the first in-city en route bus charging station is in process. It's out to bid currently. The expectation is that we go to construction this fall and it'll be active by November. And so we're very excited about that. Additionally, we will be involved with a zero emission study that RAFTA is providing, that they're starting the process with. And what this does is it's going to continually look at the different electric vehicle types and the technologies that might be available to them to continually improve the system. We will work with RAFTA and of course report back, and of course our board member will be. One thing to keep in mind as we go down this road with en route charging is the utility departments have to do a thorough study investigation of what circuitry upgrades they need. And really, they need to model the system just to make sure that the load is balanced. And utility departments will work with us as we continue down this road. I'm very excited about this next one. This is the second piece of the Parking and Transportation Adoption Plan. Again, this does aim to reduce vehicle miles traveled using traffic demand measures. And one of the key pieces that'll come out of this is not only an outreach program, but this really does focus in on a holistic view of parking in the city of Aspen. Parking in the city of Aspen is a really important traffic demand measure. You want to provide both. You want to have the transit piece and you want to have the parking piece. And so there's a lot of things to review with parking that I think will bring in community values and also give council the opportunity to create a policy that's updated when it comes to parking policies, the permit policies, the payment policies, and really bring together to assure that the parking and transportation departments are in line with your goals. And with that, I'll give it back to Jen.
So we are looking to see whether we interpreted your milestones correctly. If you have any feedback for us related to any of these goals or these milestones, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Once again, I'll start with guys, that are remote. Bill?
Thanks so much, Tori. Thanks, team there. I'm excited about this. I think there's a lot of great goals in here and milestones in here. A couple of questions and then one comment. In one of the slides you talked about the comprehensive traffic study that we requested, and within it you talked about an origin and destination study. Could you sort of speak to why that might be desirable?
I think in general terms, a lot of people are interested in there's a lot of people that cross the bridge. Where do they go? Why is there so many vehicles coming into the city, and what are they doing? And how do we better communicate with these groups that are relying on single occupied vehicles, and maybe this path of understanding exactly who's using the bridge, and especially the airport, where are the people from the airport going? By having this information, it allows council to work on specific programs that staff can work on that target some of these areas.
Got it, thanks, that's helpful. You use the terminology throughout this presentation, reducing vehicle miles traveled as opposed to improving traffic. Is that intentional? And if so, could you help me sort of understand maybe some of the subtleties? It's obvious what
there's
the
two
words
ways
mean to me, but
there's two ways of looking at it. Vehicle miles traveled is actually an obtainable metric that you can build into a report. You can do congestion studies, but they vary so much as far as like timing, whereas in vehicle miles traveled is a metric. I think the goal kind of works together is once you can get a metric that looks at the vehicle miles traveled, you then can correlate into the pieces that will improve congestion. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand there's a relationship there. But I do think, and it's one of my personal goals, that we can improve traffic without necessarily having to reduce vehicle miles traveled. I'm okay with reducing the vehicle miles traveled, and I think they do go hand in hand, but I think that there's a lot of work that can be done that doesn't rely on that. I should use the term rely on that effort. And so I think that would be my biggest feedback on your presentation is it's important to me that one of our primary goals here is to improve traffic, not just get people out of their cars.
Understood.
I'm done, Tori. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bill. I didn't hear a request in there. I hear his input as wanting to see improvement, but I didn't hear a request outside of that.
Yeah, if I had to put it in terms of request, just make sure that we keep the eye on the prize of improving traffic and improving traffic flow. And it's not just about how do we get people out of cars. It's also about how do we fix the traffic problem that we have.
So
I think though, Bill, one of the reasons staff put that in there needs to be some measuring stick of success or failure. And so if you have an alternative one you'd like to suggest, this has been one that the community's been familiar with and used for a number of years.
I totally understand that, and I understand they're related, but I also understand how they differ. And you know, maybe the metric is how long does it take to get from Main and Mill to the airport at 4 p.m. Yeah, I'm no traffic expert, but you know, to me, that's something that's we really need to improve upon. And there are always going to be times where we're all in single occupancy vehicles and we need to make that same exact trip. So how do we improve upon that? And yes, you know, fare-free RAFTA is one way that we can improve upon that by reducing the number of vehicle miles traveled, but maybe also some reconfiguring of traffic signals, like you mentioned, Pete, or some other similar tactics, physical changes to the roadway can also help towards that. So I totally get the relationship. I also think that there's some critical differences and that we should be working from both angles.
I think we all agree. We all agree is that we hope that that's impacted positively. The one thing I'll point you to, Bill, is that at the top of this council goal, under the very first item A, which is about the traffic study scoping, the first sentence says exploring potential traffic congestion improvements from Brush Creek to Aspen. So,
correct.
So it is pulled out in that in this document. It is pulled out, but under the one that you're talking about, yes, we have decided to utilize the VMT for the metric. But yes, your sentiment is echoed in this document, twice actually.
Great. I just wanted to highlight the importance of it from my perspective, but I did see that and I do understand that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other items here, Bill?
No, thanks.
Okay, John?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I look forward to seeing how we can get people out of their single occupancy vehicles. I'm one of the guilty party, I'll admit it. And I spent a lot of time this week driving up and down Valley, and as I've shared with quite a few people on staff, the bad traffic isn't isolated just to Aspen. Yes, it is backed up to the airport almost every day, almost all day, but there are pockets of bad traffic all the way in Glenwood. Glenwood is, I think, experiencing worse traffic than we are. I just want to take this opportunity to try and plug the connection, the bike trail that we're looking at putting in between the park and ride and the ABC. It's definitely a missing link in our system, and I think even if it can get, I don't know how many people can get out of their cars, but I know some people will be willing to get out of their cars, get on their bikes, so they don't have to sit in traffic at the airport. Please support the trail from the park and ride to the ABC. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Then I'll go to Ward.
Yeah, I have comments throughout this section. One is, I tend to agree with Bill on some of this, is what needs to be studied that we haven't already studied. And, you know, an origin and destination study, to me, I mean, to me, the emphasis is getting into and out of Aspen, not so much the mobility within Aspen. I think the downtown, we've already talked about increasing the scope of that a bit. The circulators from RAFTA, I think that we contract with RAFTA. I think those are doing a great job at us getting the people into and out of. And I think that I'm just struggling with understanding why we need to know where the people are coming from that are coming into Aspen, because they're coming from somewhere down valley and they're coming into Aspen both during the day and in the, you know, they're coming inwards primarily in the morning, but also particularly après ski people coming in from Snowmass and into town. We see backup of traffic there, but I just I'm struggling to see what hasn't been studied already that we need to study. And then the comment after that is, what good are studies if action is not following? I mean, for 40 years, we've been doing studies on getting into and out of Aspen, and without the political will and the commitment to doing something about it, it's just a waste of funds. And if people don't accept the results, only thing we get is a delay in addressing the problem. So I'm just struggling with what an origin and destination study is going to give us that we don't already have. As far as I think a lot of this is the valley-wide is RAFTA, bailiwick, and one thing that we at RAFTA have been doing for years is looking at a valley-wide fare-free. And I think what we need to get from RAFTA is what the revenue hit is or would be if the valley-wide fare-free was initiated. It doesn't cost less money to run the service. It just doesn't generate the fares. So what would have to be made up, and how could those funds be provided? And are we looking at Aspen providing that those funds? So that's the revenue hit that RAFTA has for the valley-wide fare free. Yeah, and when we get to, I guess I'm on page ahead, but we're getting into the Newcastle Creek Bridge and entrance to Aspen, which I think is where we should be focusing. And that if we do a study, and this is where when we had the last work session that I really wanted to get, and Pete, I sat down with you and Trish afterwards and tried to really drill down to what we want to learn. And what I want to learn is I know what the preferred alternative is. I know how we got to that point. I know we have a record of decision, and we have an environmental impact study. We have open space transfers. We have all of that in line. And now there's again an increased entrance in the S curves, and anything that on a new study, I want to know what it's going to cost for purchasing right away to soften the curves to allow mass transit into and out of Aspen, both in the morning and in the evening. I think that the CDOT has said that those S curves will not allow for light rail, and that's what part of the record of decision is to allow for future use of light rail. So what would have to be done? What would have to be purchased? What is the cost going to be to make the existing alignment acceptable for future use of mass transit, whether it be trackless tram or light rail as it stands now. I just don't see that reversible third lane is gonna get us where we need to go. And I think John mentioned this as well, and Bill, you brought it up. I think that see, vehicle miles traveled. If you look at how many people are coming in and compare that with the vehicle miles traveled, there's an intersection there between the single occupancy vehicles. So the more people we can get into town by decreasing vehicle miles traveled, I think it requires getting people out of single occupancy vehicles, and what we can do to address that. And I know that New York is the first country or first city in the United States, I think, to introduce congestion pricing, and New Jersey's already suing them. But I know that the Upper Valley Mobility Forum at the Aspen Institute, particularly John Bennett, was really supportive of congestion pricing. And in some places around the world, it has really proved to be effective. But I don't know if we can achieve that. And I think my final comments were on page 16 and next to the last comment. I think that RAFTA housing is a RAFTA issue. They have to find the funding for it. And I do not support city funds to house RAFTA employees only. If a RAFTA employee qualifies for city housing, they live and work, they work in Pickens County, yeah, they can get into the pool with everybody else. But I don't support city funds going to just house RAFTA employees, although I value them immensely, and I think it's an integral part of the solution. I just think that our housing fund, the 115 505 fund, should be directed to housing people that work in Aspen or Pickens County, and I don't support a priority system by who does what, when. Yeah, and I think I mentioned this already about the priority should be in and out of Aspen, not so much transit within the city limits. I think the downtown expansion is really the only thing that I can think of that might help with that, and I do support that. And that's about all I have to say about that.
Thanks, Ward. We'll come back to some of that. Sam.
Thanks, Tori. Thank you all for this presentation, the work that you're doing on this. Mobility was our #1 goal from the staff retreat, and it was the only unanimous one, so it's like near and dear to all our hearts. So I appreciate that. Let's see, a few things. The comprehensive traffic study, I'm just wanted to say again, same with the like building IQ stuff, I hope it does lead to actionable items. So I really hope that provides the information we're looking for. Contrary to other things, the zero fare routes, I think are a tremendous benefit to this valley and to Aspen. So I fully support if we can help RAFTA house bus drivers so we can get zero fare routes throughout the valley. I think that's a tremendous benefit to us as a city and well-used funds, because I do think specific problems need specific solutions, and that one is a no-brainer to me as far as trying to house RAFTA bus drivers. In the slides, we talked about the existing bridge being replaced, and just like one piece of note was I didn't see in the slides that studying whether an additional lane can be put in, not just replacing the current bridge as is with 2 lanes, but having it be 3 lanes, and I would say even 4. I don't think 4 would fit in there, so you can just say like we studied it and it can't work, but I just would like to see a 3-lane bridge study be done with the work that you're doing on that. I was just wondering, traffic reduction and mitigation techniques. I know the 2017 mobility lab that the Institute partnered on, trying to potentially look into some of those solutions. It was, I always like that study because it's never a one size fits all, and it said there was like 5 or 6 different things that we should be doing. So going back to that study and actually trying to use it towards actionable items would be potentially wonderful. Another thing to just like note in my mind when it comes to traffic is keeping traffic on Main Street for as long as possible. I talked about when we did the West End pedestrian safety work session, but if there was a way to keep traffic at least till 7th and Hallam and out of the West End in any future design, I think that'd be great because, I mean, truth be told, this is like a West End conversation, but we shouldn't, the West End, our residential neighborhoods, regardless of it being the West End or somewhere else, are not designed to have like mass traffic going through it. The inbound traffic, I think we got an information only update where people are using the West End to come into Aspen at a much lower clip than they are on the way out, which is only logical. So when the inbound traffic happens around the airport, at least that is mostly on Highway 82, but when the outbound traffic happens, a lot of that spills into our residential neighborhoods, and I do think that is something that I would love to see solutions on for traffic reduction in those neighborhoods and how to keep it on the streets that are intended to hold that traffic. And with that, my last note is I've always believed that outbound traffic should be easy. I think traffic in this town is one of those contradictory issues where we want traffic reduction, but we don't want more single occupancy vehicles, even though, as we all know, single occupancy vehicles, there's a time and place for them where we can't use public transit. That's just a fact of life. So if you can't solve traffic as a whole going both directions, I think outbound traffic should be a priority, especially because of that residential neighborhood note, but also because outbound traffic, I think, is what affects the city of Aspen mostly, because like I said, the traffic coming in is on Highway 82, but when it backs up on Main Street, when it goes into the West End, I do think that's a more holistic problem that as every community member can relate to. And I know, like, from a personal point of view, that I avoid going down Valley between 3 and 6 p.m., and I feel like there's many others like me that would enjoy if going outbound was easier. So with all the things that you're doing are wonderful. Those are my hopeful notes that have helped prioritize what I'm looking towards, and thank you.
Thanks, Sam. A couple comments from me then, and I'm going to start by going back and talking about the study that we're discussing. Counselors have different viewpoints and opinions about this. I am talking specifically about the traffic study scoping, I think it's called. Yeah, traffic study scoping. First thing I would say is it says in here that it would take through 2025 for the study completion. I guess I'm interested in having a deeper discussion about what we can get done sooner than later. I do support the study. I don't like spending money on studies, but in this particular case, we continually hear anecdotal information. Some people say it's all the construction vehicles that are coming into town. Some people say it's the single occupant vehicles that are coming into town. Some people say that not enough people are riding the bus and more should. We don't know what the makeup of our traffic is. And if we're going to be impactful and try to look at solutions, we need to know what the problem is. And I don't think that right now we do. So I am not in favor of a 2-year study, and I'd want to have more discussion about what we can get done, but I do recognize the importance of this. I think, I believe that there are roadway improvements that can be made. And I think I heard that from Bill, I think I heard that from Sam, and I think that's shared perhaps by others as well. And so I think that we should be having a conversation about roadway improvements that we can be making now. And if that requires going to a vote for 100 square feet of open space, then we should do it. If that requires a vote for any other usage, then we should do it. There are things that we can do to help improve the flow of current traffic. A couple things that I want to say about this as an overall issue, though. You know, it's always interesting to me when I get a phone call from somebody who's in their car, who's in traffic, and wants to complain about the traffic. Because for some reason, everybody thinks it's everybody else but them, and that everybody is in their way. I just want to say that if you're in the traffic, you are part of the traffic. The second thing I want to say is this traffic is caused by us. So if anybody's out there and you voted yes on Lift 1A, you voted for more traffic. If you are continually seeking more visitors, more sales, more money, more community amenities, and more attraction, then you are voting and asking for more traffic. We need to be conscientious about what we are talking about here. This is not a case where you can have your cake and eat it too. If we are going to keep generating traffic, we are going to have more traffic. I think that an interesting question that comes up is Sam talks about the current alignment through the S-curves and the one corner that's by the Hickory House, the Christian Science Reading Room, I believe it is. I wonder as well, is it possible to soften that curb? I know there's a tree there. Is it possible to soften the curb without losing the building?
There's been a lot of infrastructure discussion. We do have a project in the AMP fund that was directed by council through the West End discussions that are starting to address those specific items.
Great.
To start looking at essentially what we're calling the project is efficiency along the 82 corridor, and that's really the S-curves. So
Great.
a lot of those are on a faster track than the full study, but it's looking at some of the pieces that you've requested through the West End discussions.
Thank you so much for that. I want to say for the record, because I have stayed off of this as much as possible, but you know, my track record goes back almost 30 years, but 20 plus years talking about this. And yes, I originally was a proponent and an advocate for a reversible third lane. But that's 20 years ago. That's when we literally as a community could have afforded to build it ourselves without partnership. When estimates were coming in between $10 and $20 million for a replacement bridge at Castle Creek. I am not stuck on that. That is not Tory's solution for the valley. If there is a new Castle Creek bridge that I think works for our community, that does impact traffic positively, that does maintain our character and community here, and doesn't just simply allow for more traffic flow into Aspen, I'm all for it. I don't have a problem with it. My current problem with the preferred alternative as we've seen it is how wide that platform is, the fact that it's 2 lanes of bus, 2 lanes of traffic, and an apron for some sort of transit component. I don't think that that is the appropriate solution for us, but I am very interested in getting more information about what the existing Castle Creek Bridge is going to need and when it's going to need it. Because the longer this conversation goes on, the sooner and sooner the replacement of that is necessary. So I want us to all be very conscientious about that. I do not think that light rail is a solution that is coming back. Trackless trams may be something that is a replacement for that, and I'm interested in that. But I don't think that light rail is going to be maintained through the corridor. I don't think it's going to be funded from here to where it needs to serve, and that is not just to the ABC or the airport. Anyway, this is a wicked problem. This is one that we can maybe improve, but you aren't going to solve it. So I am all for everything we do. I appreciate everybody who goes through the brain damage that this causes, talking about this over and over, looking for solutions, and then you know, really working around the actual limitations that are there. But I also want to thank everybody that uses an open and creative mind to start thinking about what we can do and what this alignment really might look like going forward. And I'm talking in the next 5-10 years of changes. I think that, you know, the questions and what we're trying to get to here is confirmation of the goal work plan, how it lines up with the milestones and how those lined up with the conversations we had at our retreat, setting our goals. What I'm hearing here is there's a lot of questions and a lot of individual takes, but I don't see any major changes to the intent of the milestones. Bless you. We have got something in here for everybody. The traffic study scoping is something that I believe that we really need to have in order to have a clear and accurate picture of the issue that we are trying to improve. No fare and ridership incentive opportunities is something that came up at the table, and Councilor Guth was very supportive of looking into this. Castle Creek Bridge evaluation is something that we are all interested in, and how that impacts West End neighborhood, Highway 82 transit, and the like. Advancing electrification for transit, we are all on board with this as it touches on several of our goals. The reviewing housing needs with RAFTA, that is a touchy spot because it does cross over into some of the housing conversations that we've had. I'll be interested kind of to hear more about this and more from this, but I think we all recognize the importance of housing. Now, how housing impacts mobility and transportation, that's another conversation that we'll have to have later. Transportation and parking plan adoption. Again, this is something that we all talk about. So I know that we need to be working on this and looking at that from that holistic point of view. So with that, I'm going to look at other counselors again. Is there anything that you wanted to highlight as input that you didn't hear reflected back in where these goals and milestones are aimed? And there may be some, there may not be some. All right. If you have anything last minute to chime in, please do. But at this time, we think that the goal work plan is pretty much set up to cover the basis of what we're trying to get done, which is improving both our traffic congestion, improving our, reducing, I should say, our vehicle miles traveled, and looking long-term at the transit corridor for what improvements can be made. I think those are really what we're looking at. So with that, we will stay on the plan, try to fix this wicked problem.
Ciao, y'all.
I appreciate
Thanks
you,
all
Lord.
so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You guys have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you back here soon.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, GrassRoots.